Welcome back to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Julia Moss, joined with a very, very special guest, Mike Watts. Mike does a whole lot around the world of sports broadcasting, including being a play-by-play voice for the National Women's Soccer League, the lead commentator for SEC Soccer, and a public address announcer for the New York Knicks and numerous teams around college basketball, among, I'm sure, a lot of other things. And if that intro it tells you one thing, it's that, Mike, you are a very busy guy. So thank you so much for taking the time. How are you doing today?
Pleasure's all mine. Happy to chat with a fellow WFUV sports manager, as it may be. I'm a little more distant from the job than you, but yeah, excited to spend a little time with you.
Well, I want to get started with, I think, the most important thing. It's a big day for you. It's a big anniversary. 10 years officially broadcasting the National Women's Soccer League. Your 167th NWSL game will be tonight, which is just insane. So my first question is, since you started in 2014, the NWSL has evolved so much over the years, and you've been there to really broadcast it from start to now. What are the biggest changes you've seen in the evolution of the National Women's Soccer League from the beginning of your broadcasting career with the league until now?
Yeah, I mean it's fun. I came in the second year that the league existed, and at that point it's can we get to year 4? That was sort of everyone's comment going into it because that's how WUSA went, that's how WPS went. We knew there was a lot of star power, and that if ever it really took hold, then there'd be a real chance to launch something here. And the growth of MLS and the venues that the players were able to play in has certainly played a role. Truthfully, so much of it came pushing from players and from fans. And if you think about the history of sports leagues in this country, they were barnstorming in baseball for decades. It takes a while for it to grab hold, and it takes something really special to be able to usurp some of that process. And luckily, for people who enjoy the game in this country, like soccer was really beginning to blossom and bloom. The infrastructure got better, and then the demand for better from fans and players created the desire to invest, created greater viewership numbers, better ticket sales. It continued to expand the popularity of the players themselves, of the teams. I think back to, when I started my first professional job in sports, I was still at WFUV at the time. After my junior year, was taking the train to Piscataway and calling Sky Blue FC games, back in the day. And the head of marketing would come scoop me at the train station in his drop top convertible and drive me over to the stadium. But they didn't have a budget for Ubers for announcers. And here I am tonight. We're going to have 10,000 in Orlando. They've got more than 10,000 that'll be in Louisville, Kentucky tomorrow. Gotham is playing at Red Bull Arena. I'm working for Amazon tonight with, 15 cameras and 1080, just beautiful video. And it's just so far from where we started. It's been a blessing to be a part of it because I didn't fully comprehend how much space there was for this league and how far it would grow. And so it's even beyond my wildest dreams how far it's come. So to sort of be able to sit here and say, like, I wasn't quite day one, but not that far off, I take a lot of pride and pleasure in that.
And you've been a broadcaster through several World Cups, and something, women's sports is certainly having a moment that I believe will be, withstanding, long lasting, if you will. But something about soccer in particular is that popularity of the sport really spikes during every World Cup. And you've been broadcasting this league for several World Cups at this point. Is that something that you've noticed as a broadcaster, that attendance, like records and whatnot, kind of spike after those World Cups? And, as present day, as we're entering in that kind of no man's land of 2 years since the last World Cup, 2 years until the next World Cup, have you seen just your perspective on that aspect of the sport?
Yeah, I think anytime you get sort of one of those major tournaments, right? So we're talking, of course, the World Cup and the Olympics, like that's going to be where it's not a million people watching, it's 10, 15, 20 million people watching. And in terms of soccer numbers, those are extraordinary. And so you just want people to understand how great these athletes are and how great the competition is in our league in particular, but the case in others as well. And to let people understand, like, this is not a keyhole into a moment. This is going on all the time. The fun part about the World Cup is, yeah, there's that big pop, and this was after a deflating U.S. performance in Australia and New Zealand. But yeah, there was a pop coming off of it. But then you get to the start of this year, and San Diego's putting 35,000 people in a stadium, and they have a wonderful start on ABC, and the numbers for Amazon have been strong. And so, like, we're sitting here going, like, okay, this isn't just because of the World Cup. That's a great marketing tool for the league and for the sport to say this is our apex internationally, but you should have been watching the whole time. So I hope as the Olympics come around, whether it's your Crystal Duns at Gotham or your, we've got San Diego, Naomi Girma and Alex Morgan. We've got Orlando tonight. So, obviously Marta's been a part of so many World Cups. We hope you're watching them compete in that, but we hope that you're watching them in March through November, because they're going to be playing just as exciting a brand of football now as they are for that 1 month in the summer this year, the 1 month last year, and then the 1 month that'll come up in 2 years from now.
Absolutely. Let's zoom in just a little bit to Gotham FC, because man, they have had a crazy offseason and a crazy into last season as well. As someone who gets to go to those games working in the communications department, I'll never forget the decision day in the NWSL where they barely squeak into the playoffs, get that 6th seed going in, and then they win it all. I mean, I don't want to say it was a Cinderella run, but I certainly don't think many people had them winning the whole championship. So I wanted to get your perspective from the beginning of that playoff run. They get the 6th seed, barely get into the playoffs. What were your expectations for Gotham? And then, what did you make of their playoff run to the championship?
Yeah, so last year, obviously, that you mentioned decision day, they played all 6 games at the same time. And so I actually had Orlando and Houston, who both had a route into the playoffs. And the best route for them was that Gotham didn't blow out Portland the way that they ultimately did. Like Angel City, certain results would have made a substantial impact. I mean, there was really no clarity, right, as to how it was going to play out by the time that the season ended. However, if you look at what Yael Averbuch West and the ownership group have done in recent years, the groundwork was always being laid for that. The Juan Carlos Amaro style, very aesthetically pleasing. It's really beautiful soccer. It takes time to implement that. It takes time to get players that frankly are capable of playing that at the highest possible level. He's had this magic touch in Houston. He had it again at Gotham. But if you look at, the intent, it was, we're going to bring in players that are commensurate with playing in the biggest market in this country and one of the biggest soccer markets on the planet. So they sort of got everyone in on the same page, and then just went to work over this offseason. It's been well documented in bringing in players that could continue to add to the level of it. So, a lot of people say overnight success, right? And that, that ignores all the work that you put in and all the days that lead to it. I think Gotham a little bit of a victim of that. And as you look at the work they did over the offseason, it's one of those, live long enough the hero, you become the villain. And when you go out and you bring in all these different pieces, there's going to be a little bit of that too. But it coincides with a unique moment in the history of the league. The WNBA has had an element of free agency. It's really quite new to the NWSL. I mean, we're talking the last 2 years. And speaking with Kelly O'Hara, she's going, yeah, I was stirring the pot. I was asking everyone to come join us. I was recruiting. Are you kidding me? And even she admitted, Yael said, all right, as the GM and along with our technical staff, this is our vision for the offseason. She literally said, oh, well, like, that's a nice theory. But like, how are you going to do it with the salary cap? How are you going to make it work in terms of, in terms of roster building, it's a whole element of the offseason that, like, we've never had the chance to experience in the NWSL before. And they say, okay, we're going to go out and we've got Kelly O'Hara and Lynn Williams, but we're going to add Rose Lavelle, and we're going to add Tierna Davidson, and we're going to add Crystal Dunn. And I mean, that is just a silly, stupid amount of talent to add to one team. So, like, it started as a Cinderella because they laid all the groundwork finally at Gotham in the right way. And then they have supercharged it. And now the question becomes, you need to stay healthy. And there's only one ball on the field. And it's all the stuff that we talk about in any other big three, big four of any sport that we talk about in this country that we've yet to really have the chance to document in the NWSL yet.
100%. And Gotham is so interesting because usually you see teams who are kind of in a bad place try and get a super team together to change something. Gotham wins a championship and then builds a super team. It's so interesting and cool to see. It's certainly a storyline to follow along the NWSL. But my next question about Gotham FC is they have the roster now. They obviously have the talent. They have the right coaching staff. Does this make it a championship or bust season?
Yeah, and that's a question I asked a number of players and coaches in the lead up. I had their Challenge Cup game for Amazon for Prime Video back in March, and I don't think anyone shies away from the expectations. I think there's a lot of different ways with different trophies you can win, but like Kelly O'Hara was saying, we have the number 5 written on our whiteboard. Now that number is 4, but the reality is we want to win. They played the Women's Cup down in South America before the year. We want to win the Challenge Cup. We want to win the Shield. We want to win the Summer Tournament, which is played with the Liga MX Femenil team. We want to win the Shield. We want to win the title. We want to win everything. And ultimately, the Challenge Cup has already escaped their grasp, but they're not shying away from that. The big thing coming into that game was you look at the players that they acquired, and some of it's through no fault of their own, right? International duty will take games away from you. In the case of Crystal Dunn, it was maternity. In the case of Rose Lavelle, it was sort of a bunch of ticky-tack injuries that added up. You can go right down the list. Those 4 have only played 52% of the last 2 seasons. So how do you keep them healthy and peaking in October? That there's just it's one of those things where it's kind of like coming off an Achilles tear. Here comes Kevin Durant, to make a men's sports analogy. Yes, the talent's there. Will he be completely ready to go for the 80-game season and the playoffs to win a title? And ultimately there, it didn't work out. You can look at the Liberty and say, okay, they acquired all this talent, but then you run into a really cohesive team with the best player in the W in Las Vegas, and you don't win the title. So there'll be some growing pains, and they acknowledge that, but they've also been very clear of what their ambition is. So as you go into this year, championship or bust, I sort of tend to lean away from that because I know the nature of pro sports. But Julia, it'd be silly not to look at that roster and go, why should they not win the championship if it's intact?
Exactly. And then soccer, again, another unique situation where these players have played together quite a bit, even though they haven't been on the same team per se all this time. These are all U.S. women's national team players. So they go into camps, they play a lot, they play months together. You look at the World Cup, the last Olympics, certainly not the first time. The chemistry building won't be as difficult as you see with like the New York Liberty. But let's zoom out just a little bit to the way just international soccer as a whole, because if there's one thing we learned about the World Cup, it's that the parity within teams is a lot more intense. Like the competition is a lot better, and you're seeing that run through the domestic leagues as well. The Women's Super League getting all-time attendance, all-time viewership, and you're also seeing that with the NWSL, a lot of high name players moving leagues between each other. You look at Barbara Banda moving over here, Jen Beattie, and then, players like Emily Fox going to Arsenal. A lot of movement between these 2 leagues, or between all the leagues. Is that parity, that's something good for international soccer? And do you see that continuing, further beyond this year?
Yeah, that's actually, it's something we're going to address a little bit tonight, and I've been talking to GMs around the league about, as it pertains to like, okay, Chelsea just went in and sold one of the best goalkeepers available to Gotham. That's sort of the market is open for another, as we're chatting, 9 hours and 45 minutes. The reason I bring that up is like the US, the ownership groups that have come in have as much, if not more money to throw at this than anybody. And so 2 players from Zambia, resetting the entire market as it replaces the transfers. If you want to get a good center back in England in the Premiership on the men's side, 10 million pounds is like, that's a nice start. $10 million in the transfer market right now. Now there's salary cap, and how do you make all that work? That'll buy you the best at every position. Like, we're only talking the transfer market's like 750,000 for the record. So there's an element of that where, like, now that we're starting to see more player movement, you're going to go where you're going to be treated the best, where you're going to have the best chance to win, where you're going to have the best chance to eventually play for your national team, and where you'll get the best coaching and have the best experience as a player in games. So the NWSL had certainly a number of come to Jesus moments that they needed over the past few years to set up the ability to say, look at where we train, how we train, the coaches we're bringing in, the level of parity within our league. You want to be here. And so getting a number of Spanish national teamers, getting the top 2 players from Zambia, getting players from the English Women's Super League, like, that is all a clear statement of intent on the part of the NWSL to continue to say we're the best in the world. But parity has to play a role in that. So how do you make sure that you don't have what you have now in the WSL? Chelsea has 46, Man City have 46, Arsenal at 40, Man United's already eliminated from winning the title. Last year, we had 10 teams out of 12, 11 teams out of 12 that were in it with a week to go, and every team in the league was in it with 2 weeks to go. So, like, how do you balance that and make sure that this still feels like there's something on the line every single week? Because that's the exhilarating part. I could look at my schedule on Prime Video in March and go, I am confident that the game we have Halloween weekend to close out the year is going to be a good one. I'm confident. It's a borderline guarantee. So yeah, it's going to be a really sort of, like, the league has this massive sort of lead in parity. Everyone acknowledges that the U.S. puts out these great players. Everyone acknowledges that this is probably the best league on the planet, top to bottom. And now we're trying to raise the ceiling on it. We've got the resources to do it. It's a really fun time to be a part of. I can tell you that.
Absolutely. And there's something English soccer fans, when they're looking at the National Women's Soccer League, they always point a finger and say, well, there's no promotion and relegation. Well, you don't really need that in the NWSL because you're playing for something, as you mentioned, pretty much every week of every year. And you don't have that in the Women's Super League where there is promotion and relegation. So I guess the bottom teams are still playing to not get relegated. But in the NWSL, the bottom teams could be playing for a playoff spot in the last week of the season. So that's my rebuttal to those comments that I see all too often on Twitter. But as I mentioned at the top of the show, you call college soccer, and something that I have been very passionate about trying to learn more about is the differences between, on the English side, they have youth academies. That's a big thing in England. And in America, that's not something really on the women's side that has been looked into much. We have the college draft. So I was wondering, in your perspective, when you look at academies versus college, because sometimes, the lack of academies can be pointed at the fact that we have the college game and the college draft. So what is your perspective and your opinion on, should there be academies? Should we keep going with the college soccer system, or should they work in tandem?
Yeah, for one, I love that we're able to have this conversation in a nuanced setting, because it's tough to fully gauge the whole, I want to say problem, but the whole of that question successfully in a tight space. When you look at the use of the under 22 initiative within NWSL, or rather the under 18 initiative, it's under 22 in MLS. The idea of creating a safe, positive developmental work environment within these teams is vital to get where you want to go. Where we were with Olivia Moultrie in Portland when she, at 14, 15 years old, wants to turn pro is, do we have separate locker rooms for a minor? Do we have the ability to help a young player through academic studies to get to a point where they're able to play and do both? Do we have the coaches in place that are vetted well enough to look after that player and their best interests, both now and in the future? All those things were 5 years ago, as we now know, very much rightfully questioned. The nature of the men's game is that's how you make money in the lower divisions or in selling leagues to sort of continue the run of a professional team. In the case of, I do a ton of work with USL, Kobe Henry coming out of Orange County and being sold to a team in France for $1 million pays your entire payroll for a year. Mark McKenzie getting moved from Bethlehem Steel to Philadelphia Union over to Belgium paid for their entire academy for multiple years. And it allows you to give the resources without having to pay an obscene amount of money to be a part of the game. And so as the transfer market continues to push and the value of developing players goes up, not just to your current team, but financially, there's going to be a greater desire to bring in young players. As I spoke to Casey Stoney yesterday at training, I was asking about a young player, Kimi Ascanio, who came in as a sub in the Challenge Cup. And I said, hey, you've seen Kimi now a couple times. Before I even finished my question, her smile was ear to ear. She goes, she reminds me, not as a player, but is a player with ceiling, of Lauren James, who's captaining Man United in the English national team. And to have a player of her stature, former England captain, go, I can't wait to help develop this prodigious talent, is the long-term direction of the game. At the end of the day, there's 14 teams and then the Super League, the USL Super League that's coming as well. So let's say 22 teams this year. And by the time we get out of a couple of years from now, we're probably going to be around 30 pro teams. There's not enough places to replace college soccer. But I hope it continues to push, as the men have and a handful of coaches on the women's side, to professionalize the rules a little bit in the college game to make it a more consistent experience to what they'll eventually get in the pro game. If the NBA or the W only said you could make 5 subs a game, and all of a sudden you were doing what North Carolina women's soccer does, where it's like every 5 minutes you know, from 30, 35, 40, 45, making 8 changes, your head would spin when you get to the college game, to the pro game. You aren't preparing players necessarily for that nature of it. Now, North Carolina's got a different argument as to what they're doing to prepare players by doing that. And that's where the nuance comes in. But like, how do you make sure that a player gets the right opportunity? Because there's not going to be a pro contract for every player capable of playing D1 soccer. How do you make sure that the players on the top end of that are best able to make the transition? And then if you're going to go into the academy setup and the under 18 initiative, I've had coaches say, frankly, we are unprepared as an organization to make that commitment to a player and her family that we're going to look after her right now. We want to, but we want all our ducks in a row because you can't get this wrong, which is the right approach. And so when you look at a team like Seattle, a team like San Diego, Gotham had a young player have an extraordinary preseason. Just make sure that when you get into it, this is not like bringing in a 23-year-old adult who's been through college and been away from home. This is a completely different ask. So the academy system is going to come a long way in a short time, as it did with MLS, to mirror what we've seen around the world, because this is a global game, but it needs to be done at a pace which will be painstaking for some, in a way that looks after the safety of the player, the development of the player, and the ability to make it repeatable moving forward, and also give the right amount of value to make that worth it for the clubs as well, where it's not, we're filling out our roster with a young player that doesn't have potential. That hurts everybody. Go out and get a player that's ready for this moment and has worked through your group to get to that point.
100%. And keeping on the topic of college soccer, you're very familiar with SEC college soccer. The season just well, not just ended, but it's in the off season now. Who are some big players that you see, making an impact next season, or just teams in general that you see making a jump next season?
Yeah, college soccer, like everything in college now, is going to be tougher to predict.
Yeah.
A lot of times, even in the spring, do you really know who's going to be there come the fall? Luckily, the coaching carousel has stopped, but Texas coming into the league for the first time is really intriguing. You're talking about a team that's consistently top 10 out of the Big 12 and yet consistently don't get the College Cup, which is sort of where a lot of these teams in the SEC exist. It's that next iteration, and they were hoping SEC Network a decade ago would be the thing that got them on TV more, that would lead to College Cup. Then they hoped, okay, now it's going to be NIL. We've got more money in our pot than some others do. The ACC will say, look at our academic institutions. No one can compete with us on that. The Big Ten now has a big pile of money, and also they've got to hook into the West Coast where so many great players come from. All that in mind, I think Alabama is at the point now where they will perpetuate success. I had questions about that going into last year with all they lost, and they continued to win. Arkansas plays a completely and utterly unique style to anyone in college soccer. They're always going to be athletic. They've got some really talented players coming back. Even though they've lost their Parker Goins and Anna Potagills, and so they'll continue to go. Texas will be interesting. South Carolina will always be up. They'll always be competitive. And then you've got teams like, okay, is Tennessee really ready to jump back into that group after losing Brian Penske to the national champ Florida State? Oklahoma brought in Matt Mott from Ole Miss. So how ready are they to compete in an SEC level after that had been left to wither on the vine as long as it had in Oklahoma? Mississippi State was great last year. They've used the portal well. They've got one of the most respected coaches in college soccer in James Armstrong. So all of this to say, I think there's that top tier 3, 4, 5 teams. Then it seems like everybody else, no one is half. I'm on an NPR affiliate, folks. I need to take it back a step. No one is using half measures in the SEC. So I'd be surprised if the tournament doesn't expand to 12 out of 16 teams. If you ask me, how many teams can you guarantee will make it? I'll say maybe 9 or 10. How many teams are going to be capable of getting the last 2 spots? Literally everybody else. And that's going to be the fun part of the SEC this year. It's going to be the most beautiful dumpster fire you've ever watched.
Incredible quote there. I want to end this on a light note. I saw on your Twitter that you achieved something incredible by fitting an unheard of amount of Taylor Swift lyrics or Taylor Swift song titles into a broadcast before. And as you know, I'm sure Taylor Swift just released not 1, but 2 albums today. I woke up to the second one. A lot of discourse on Twitter and all social media. I want to ask, have you listened to it and what are your thoughts?
I have not yet. So I'm on the road. I'm in Orlando. I still live up in Mill Neck out on Long Island. So my wife is a school teacher. I try and wake up in the morning and give her a call, and the nature of a husband being away. And this is a rare day where it's like, Michael, I want to talk to you, but they are playing this entire new Taylor Swift record on Channel 13 on Sirius XM on the Swift channel. So I got relegated, rightfully so. See, we do have pro rel in America.
There it is.
So she's listened to it. I have not yet. It's a game day and I'm all over, but I do have every intention of trying to work every safe for air song title into the game tonight in some way. We did 235 of her, well, almost all of her hits during an Open Cup game a couple weeks ago. And I have not said publicly that that's my intent tonight outside of this. So we're going to find out if people catch on that I am gradually working through the Tortured Poets department tonight in real time on Prime Video. But words are fun. Broadcast is fun. This show, one-on-one, is meant to be fun. So I'm not degrading the game. I'm just acknowledging that we could all stand to laugh once in a while, and Taylor Swift is giving us and one of her best friends, in sports is on the field, and Alex Morgan. So, let's just sit down and soak it in a little bit, have a good time with it.
Absolutely. Well, I was already going to be locked in, but I'm certainly going to be locked in now on your call tonight. You'll have to let me know what you think of it, because I love it. Some people don't, but I think it's great. But once again, Mike Watts, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck on the call tonight. We will be right back with more one-on-one.